This is the rear wheel off my 1971 BSA Lightning A65 Conical Hub. I spent a long time looking online to try and figure out what the procedure was for removing the wheel bearings. I couldn't find anything anywhere, so I decided I would make this video after I had done it myself. After it had been stripped down, this is what came out of it. We've got the retainer ring. This is for the brake side of the wheel with a grease sleeve up against the open bearings, which I am replacing. The grease sleeve, which is a little different than the other side, which is on the speedometer drive side. The center spindle upon which each of these fits on like that, and then the new bearings, which I looked for online, and what I found was that the British supply shops online would sell these for about $15. I was able to buy 4 of them on Amazon for $10 using their new modern designation, which is what was it, 6204-2RS, something like that. I'll post that in, like people do when they make corrections. Getting this all disassembled off the bike was tricky. Trying to get all the nuts undone. This was you can tell this wasn't in terrific shape to begin with. So things were in there quite set. This ring here is a regular thread, loosens up in this direction. I didn't have a spanner wrench, so I used a little bit of breakaway. No, I didn't. I used liquid wrench, a little bit of heat. I stuck my nail drive in and gave it a little bit of a tap, and the thing spun right out. I put the heat on until I could see the liquid wrench kind of bubbling up around the outside. That exposed the bearing inside, which wasn't terrible. And I do like to keep things original, but when it comes to wheel bearings, I mean, these were really hard to get moving to begin with, so I'm going to go with the sealed ones. I do still have a little cleaning to do around this rim for the brake, which I will do later. On this back side, where the speedometer drive goes, this was the tricky bit. This is a left-hand thread, so when I go to tighten this in, it's actually going to spin this way. This was stubborn. I don't have a tool to get at those 2 notches. What I ended up using was the rear wheel stay. I laid it across like that, and then I tried yarning on it, and it actually bent the rod. So I used more breakaway, more heat around the edge until I could see the breakaway start to move in there. Then what I actually did was I moved this towards the outside, and with a hammer I gently tapped on it enough until it finally broke away. And when that came out, again, this is left-hand thread. It even says right here LH. It's upside down. I know, I apologize for that. It moved out of the way, exposed another bearing inside, and this spacer was down inside like this. So to remove that, I actually used just a little socket end. I stuck this in the end like this, hammered on that end a bit until this bearing came out the bottom. that's when I noticed this was in the way, so a couple of taps from this side, that came out as well. In fact, the axle and the spacer in the bearing came out sort of like this, and in order to get this bearing off the spacer, I took a PVC tube, I set it in like this, I put my wrench extension in the middle of it, and then just hammer it down until the spacer fell and I was left with the bearing. To get the bearing out the other side, I did the same thing, sort of. I took the wheel, I spun it around, I actually put this back inside and I used that as my punch to get the bearing out. Again, putting this in the middle so as not to damage my spacer at all. I just hammered that through. It did reinstall the bearing on the other end, but that one came off much easier after that. And then I used that same extension to pop out this guy. I actually didn't know this was in there at first, and I started hammering away from the other side to get my bearing out, and I misshaped this a little bit. So I just went back downstairs and I flattened it out a little bit. I guess technically the use of this is not needed anymore. It was a grease shield so that it would keep the grease in these exposed bearings. Now it's just going to act as a spacer, so I don't think it has to be too awfully pretty when it goes back in there. That was about it. I'm now going to clean up this whole wheel section now that everything's out, and then once it is, I'm going to go and I'm going to install these new bearings, which move very nicely, and then I can go about putting the speedometer back on, as well as the sprocket. I'm going to reuse the sprocket. Sprocket's in fine shape. I don't know if it was replaced earlier or what, but not a whole lot to do. And because I have the coolest wife in the world, I'm able to do this in my living room. So that was it. I'm sure there's folks out there who have done this and know better ways of doing it, so feel free to give us hints and tips on the comment section.